I think what makes him appealing to tell stories about is that he does have this tragic arc. Like, he does genuinely seem to have been a very remarkable person who was also very flawed, who accomplished a lot of things, but also destroyed many lives, and who had an understanding of himself that was missing very important parts.
Silent film, which I think we could define as a separate medium to sound film, it didn't continue. It just stopped suddenly in its tracks. I'm not sure we have any other example of an art form that just stopped and was replaced by a similar but fundamentally different product. How do you feel about Napoleon as a kind of end stop to silent cinema, to an art form, to a means of expression?
I will say, if that's the send-off that silent films get, then it's a wonderful one. It would have been wonderful if we'd had the rest of it, but it also doesn't feel quite like an unfinished project to me. It ends with this explosion of images and excitement, and when it ends, you feel very riled up. You're ready to go invade Italy. You're ready to go into war with
big time.
Solomon and Smith. You're about to watch a conversation between me, Milo, and Cecily Carver. Cecily Carver writes over on Substack a newsletter where she talks about opera and fiction and films. The subject of our conversation is the 1927 film Napoleon.
Just to clarify, it's the best film ever made.
What do we talk about with Cecily, Milo?
Well, we talk about the 1927 film Napoleon and its various features, its contents, its music, certain of the people depicted therein, such as this fella, Napoleon, who you may have heard of. Apparently, they've done quite a lot on this guy, so we sort of dig in. Who is he? What did he get up to? There was much else to talk about there, such as unfinished art. When does an artwork finish? Is it better not to finish an artwork? Would the greatest men have been greater had they died a little bit earlier? The answer is universally yes, but why?
If you like what me and Milo are doing here, gemstones, gold, silver, rare earth rocks, in the Patreon link below. You get extra stuff, about 40 minutes to an hour of extra stuff per video. And the word on the street is the Patreon videos are much better than these videos. Like and subscribe and write a comment as well.
Unfortunately, I do not have large hands, and right now I'm trying to learn the Gershwin preludes.
Oh yeah, they're gorgeous. Yeah.
There are some very demanding intervals, not in terms of awkwardness, but just in terms of hand span. So there are all kinds of little tricks to avoid having to play both the notes at once. But I do wish I had larger hands for that repertoire.
A common wish, not for Jack, whose hands are sort of like a homunculus.
Size,
Look how big those are.
The scale.
Wow.
Can you reach a tenth easily?
My chin?
A tenth.
A tenth. Oh, yeah. I thought chin reaching. I was wondering how that might be a problem. Yeah, a tenth. Wait, yeah. A tenth's all right. That's pretty easy.
Yeah, sometimes I tell myself, if only I could reach a tenth, I'd be able to play everything I wanted. And of course that's not, but...
it might be true. I can get some of the minor tenths, but it takes a little bit of a...
Yeah.
Whereas that would be joy in perfect life.
I mean, hitting F from C sharp, that's a bit of a... Specifically that one is a bit of an ache. There's a curse whenever we talk to anyone who's near the Pacific Ocean that I have a terrible night of sleep the night before. I don't know whether there's some sort of Pacific Ocean things happening in my brain, my body. I feel if I ever step foot in the Pacific, I would, like the Witch of the West, sort of fade away. But if I do fall asleep mid-sentence, I hope Milo comes to my rescue.
Yeah, I'll pick it up. It's fine.
Once again, thank you so much for being here. We start these chats with a poetic epigraph. I'm going to read Percy Shelley's lines written on the death of Napoleon.
Appropriate.
I hated thee, fallen tyrant. I did groan to think that a most unambitious slave like thou should dance and revel on the grave of liberty. Thou mightst have built thy throne where it had stood even now. Thou didst prefer a frail and bloody pomp, which time has swept in fragments towards oblivion. Massacre, for this I prayed would on thy sleep have crept, treason and slavery, rapine, fear and lust, and stifled thee their minister. I know too late, since thou and France are in the dust, that virtue owns a more eternal foe, that force or fraud, old custom, legal crime, and bloody faith, and foulest birth of time. What was your first extremely profound experience of sort of aesthetic glee or rapture, Cecily, in life?
In life, wow. Profound aesthetic glee or rapture. I think it must have been when I was a small child. And my mother took me to a community theater production of Pirates of Penzance. And she was worried that I would get bored, so she brought along a big bag of candy for me to eat. I remember so much about that particular production. I think I was 7 or 8. And knew from there that I really enjoyed going to the theater, seeing things on stage, having big experiences. Going to the movies was very special as well. But it's hard to think of a first because wanting to have those kinds of experiences has been part of my personality for as long as I can remember, I think.
And is your relationship with all the arts sort of built around these feelings of being kind of overwhelmed?
Well, I don't think that's the only thing one can get from art and not the only thing I can get from art. I think that it does make it easier for me to enjoy things like opera or very, very long movies than some of my peers, because sometimes the exhaustion or the tension drawn out over a very long time can add to the experience. I remember, I think the first time I saw Der Rosenkavalier on stage, it's a longish opera, and it was beginning earlier in the day than I expected, and I thought I would have time to eat dinner between the end of my workday and going to see the show, but there was a lot less time than I expected because it was starting early, so I was starving through the entire thing, but it almost made it more religious to be very, very hungry and listening to very, very syrupy Strauss. So.
Yeah, I often feel, certainly with Wagner, Strauss friends and obsessives, that they often treated a more like a religious rite than a piece of entertainment, certainly. And there's even sort of, especially among sort of Bach people, a hair shirt mentality that if you're suffering in an evening watching every single one of the cello suites being played back to back, that's good. You should feel your sort of spiritual musical dwarfism in relationship to the cathedral that Bach's building in front of you. The thing that led up to this conversation was me lying pretty ill a week ago and sort of coming across your newsletter, which is excellent, over on Substack, and really enjoying the style in which you wrote, your attitude, but also just a really strange number of common interests, and one of which not just a commonality between me and you, Cecily, but also one that Milo shares, is that we kind of have the same favourite film, whose poster I see behind you, Abel Gance's Napoleon. A 99-year-old, pretty long, silent movie about a guy who's really good at war. So, like, all three of us are relatively disinterested in war making. All three of us relatively disinterested in the French military. Maybe a bit disconcerted by some of the fascist tropes in the film. Yet all three of us adore this thing. What is wrong with us? Why do we like this film so much?
Well, I guess my first answer would be there's actually not a lot of war in this movie. There's one centerpiece battle scene, which is the Battle of Toulon. And the rest of it, and I guess the snowball fight, which is very famous at the beginning, but it really does not concern itself at all with things like battle tactics or weapons or, the techniques that Napoleon was famous for. And it doesn't even go very far into his career. So the subject of the movie is really Napoleon as a force of personality and a force of history. And the whole movie is carried on, first of all, the charisma of this personality, this guy who is, the smartest and the best boy, who just keeps on getting what he wants in life. But also the idea of Napoleon as a force of history. And a lot of the best parts of the movie, I think, are the scenes where he's not really very involved, but that depict the events of the French Revolution. And their relationship to historical fact is a bit loose. But I think the scenes with Robespierre, the scenes in the convention are some of the best in Napoleon.
Yeah, the scene where the Marseillaise is introduced is extraordinary, partly because it's a silent film. The fact that such a central set piece that ends so rapturously with Lady Liberty sort of standing above the people in this.
Oh, that's right. I forgot that she's superimposed over
It just builds and builds, but the fact that it's a song in a movie without sound is just such a fascinating, strange, brave decision.
Well, this is where Napoleon's sort of past is even more tendril-filled than its present. Gance, being Gance, and I'm sure we'll get into his tendency soon, sort of like to break the mediums he was working in. So in early screenings of Napoleon, would have an entire choir ready to sync up with the voices on the silent film so that silence gives sudden sound and the voices are singing. And the recent French restoration of Napoleon has reintroduced this, which was very shocking to me because I was sort of watching it in they sort of premiered the first part at Bologna, and it was going more or less as it always goes. The music was different and the frame rate has been reduced, which is traditional. And then we get to this scene, and then suddenly they break out in legitimate, real voices through the screen song. And like so many scenes in Napoleon, it just has to be a moment of complete ecstasy. It's still surprising. They're still managing to hide kernels of surprise in this nearly century-old film. But I was curious, Cecily, about you were talking about the relationship of the film to history. And we get this guy, Napoleon, who is not really the historical Napoleon, but he is someone. Who do you think this guy is? Who is the Napoleon of Gance?
He is Napoleon. He is a man of an extraordinary gaze, first of all. Like a lot of silent movies work based on people's facial expressions in their eyes. And we see in a lot of scenes that the power of his gaze, the power of his look, has almost magical effects on the people around him. And I think I'm not sure if his view of Napoleon, the historical figure, is especially sophisticated. But trying to think about, why did he want to make this movie in the first place? What kind of person was he trying to depict? I think he wanted whatever would give viewers the sense of awe at a great man. Someone with magical powers, almost. Someone who could clear away all the complexity around him with the force of his being, not even really his intelligence or his military skill, but just his being as a representative of all that is progressive and right and forceful. And this is what makes it seem in moments like a propaganda film, almost, a lot of the techniques of propaganda, but it's also what make it such an exciting experience to watch.
It's interesting to use propaganda techniques on a man who'd been dead so long. Sort of, we could vaguely support these notions of liberty and fraternity and all the other ones, but curious to pose him as though you could elect this guy or support him. He's gone. It's over. And I'm not too aware, because for those who don't know, this is a sort of 5-hour long film. I mean, some editions of it may have been up to 9 hours, depending on who you believe. But it was meant to be, I believe, the first of 5, which were to span the entire career of Napoleon. So the first only gets to the invasion of Italy, which really, in terms of Napoleon's career, is very early. This is far before Emperor and far before Waterloo and the fall. So I do wonder if there was an intention in Gance to have the rise and the fall, and therefore you have this great man, capital G, capital M, who then becomes a sort of a classically fallen hero. And so you'd want him to be sort of supernaturally good at the beginning to make his defeat so immense. But at the same time, I'm not entirely sure. It could be that Gance just depicts this great guy, and then the English bastards get to him, and he can't reign in sort of infinite glory. But I'm curious if you think he had much of a historical argument at all. Do we think Gance thinks Napoleon is a force for good, or is it more on the level of he's a great character and he is a great personality, and we just stay at that personal level?
Well, I think if it were going to play out like a classical tragedy, even in this first installment of what was going to be many films, he would have introduced some idea of what is Napoleon's fatal flaw, what is his downfall, what's wrong with him that's going to undo him later. And we don't really get any of that. We don't have any sense that this is a deeply flawed man, really at all. And the only hint that we get that Gance is thinking ahead is in the scene where I believe he's about to go invade Italy, and he's standing in the empty convention, and the ghosts of these revolutionary figures come to speak to him. And they say, if you ever betray the revolution, then we will punish you. And it's like a supernatural force. And so I think that's probably how he would have framed it. Napoleon betrays the ideals of the revolution, and these spirits of history, these almost metaphysical beings, come down to punish him. So I guess in that sense, it would be like a classical tragedy, but he doesn't, at least in this stage, we'll never know how he would have handled Napoleon's fall. But at least in this stage of the movie, it doesn't seem like he's really trying to sow a lot of seeds.
There's a beautiful moment early in the film where the French geography teacher, for no discernible benefit, is telling the children about the island of St. Helena. And we get a melancholy close-up of the child Napoleon's face, looking up from his desk as if faintly aware that his destiny is bound up with this island. You said in your article, well, you've written a few on the film, but that you first saw it on VHS. Cecily, did you have any idea back then what kind of thing you were watching? I'm just curious how you categorized it, if indeed you did, back when you first saw it.
Yeah, so I think I was around 16 years old, and I was very interested in silent films. And of course, back then it was, this was the late 90s. You couldn't really stream whatever you wanted. It was a lot more difficult to find things. And there was a video store in my neighborhood in Edmonton, Alberta, that it was called Sneak Preview. And it was the cinephile video store, the the one in Edmonton, and they had basically an end cap size wall that was all silent movies. So I was working my way through them one by one, and Napoleon was one of them, and I was kind of avoiding it because, as any reasonable person might, I could see that it was 2 VHS tapes. I could see that it was about Napoleon. And I thought, oh God, this is going to be a very boring war movie, which I'm not interested in. So I avoided it, but then finally I broke down and rented it. And I know the first time I saw it, I was just absolutely mesmerized by it. And I'm not sure I was really thinking in a sophisticated way about what kind of film it was. I know that I liked those late period silent movies when they start really experimenting with what a camera can do and what a film can do before everything kind of gets set back technologically by the arrival of the sound era. And I was interested in films that did these interesting visual effects, but I was completely unprepared for this operatic and kind of ecstatic experience that it is. And I was thinking about, you said earlier, what's wrong with us that we like this movie? And I think we may not even have to go all that deep on it, because it's a good movie. It's an entertaining one. And I think if you are at all the kind of person who might be interested in watching a silent movie about Napoleon, if you watch it, you'll probably have a good time. As I saw it most recently in New York City at Film Forum, where they screened it over the course of basically an entire day. So it started at 1:30 and we got out of there at 9:30, and there were 2 intermissions and then a 2-hour-long dinner break. And going in, I thought, well, there's probably going to be a lot of attrition. People are going to get fed up with this thing and leave. But pretty much everybody stayed, and the people who stayed were mesmerized. And I heard people talking about it in the audience saying, like, wow, that was electric. That was mesmerizing. I feel it's transporting. And so I do think you have to be the kind of person who might enjoy this kind of thing, but I don't think it takes a huge leap to be entertained by it. It uses a lot of the same techniques as blockbuster movies do today in terms of, keeping the audience engaged. And this might be, don't get mad at me for saying this, but I'm thinking if there's a contemporary director who's most analogous to Gance in spirit, it might be James Cameron.
I think this is true. The truth has been stated. I feel like Titanic is the movie Abel Gance would have made about Titanic. I mean, he would have thrown in an absurd number of new techniques, but the CGI boat, Abel Gance would have been knocked out of his seat by that. He would have wanted all kinds of CGI boats in his films.
Yeah.
No, I think that's true. And I think it's also interesting because Napoleon can be a kind of a central totem to a discerning audience in a way. But I also have the sense that Abel Gance himself is quite far from being an intellectual filmmaker and quite far from a lot of the intellectual currents of the French cinema at the time, and even some of the other directors who worked on it with him, because it was a sort of big tent project in which all kinds of huge names are involved. And there is something about Gance, and maybe it's my turn to be a bit offensive here, that's a bit like the idiot savant who doesn't really have a great sense about history or about what these images mean themselves, but has such power in his spirit and such a kind of an inventive mind that every single frame, every single set piece has some element of genius in it. And I feel like a more thoughtful filmmaker, of which there are several at the time that you could peg to a Napoleon project, might have been overwhelmed by the subject itself and needing to treat it closely. I mean, there's no way you could ever get a film so heroizing of this character, comparing him to the Eagle of Destiny. There's just no way to get there. If you spend a long time thinking about it, you end up having to kind of break down the statue in some way or point it in some other direction or introduce a lot more foreshadowing than a an island on a blackboard and a few ghosts. You have to complicate it. Whereas there's something almost so earnestly just outpouring about this film, which feels that it doesn't belong to the 1920s or really, the 20th century in general. We don't make this kind of art anymore, especially at the high level. It's sort of the low tier of art. It's the stuff that mindlessly celebrates some dictator, but the high tier sort of, hang on a minute, let's think about it. But somehow Gance merges them together in sort of pure energy. I mean, can you think of any other film or even artistic project that quite marries the quite hard-headed interpretation of character and story with just aesthetic glory? And it's really, I mean, maybe music is where this kind of thing belongs.
Maybe. And interesting that it's a silent film, but music plays such a big part in the experiencing of it, which is why the score is so important. Yeah, I think that maybe someone more intellectual than Gance, or intellectual on a topic other than how to make an entertaining film, how to do interesting things with a camera, would have wanted to include a lot more irony, and a lot more complication, and it would be a completely different experience from what it is. And yeah, I think only blockbuster filmmakers of James Cameron's type would ever make that kind of thing, and they probably wouldn't make it about a very very complex historical figure whose legacy is very contentious. They just wouldn't do it, and it wouldn't be commercial at this moment.
Well, so we have an interesting, I'm going to catch up with that later, because we do have a blockbuster filmmaker who essentially did that, and then the outcomes are very different to what one might anticipate. But for the meantime, you mentioned the importance of the soundtrack for a silent film, and it's often a strange contradiction, and you will have encountered it a lot when you were going through the video store, in that many of the soundtracks don't really belong to the films. They've been added or composed so much later, because original scores, they often didn't survive. And even some that have survived, sort of modern cinephiles prefer a new score. And the score can completely determine the content of the film. You can give it a different score, and suddenly everything about it feels different, even though the score is obviously nothing to do with the actual filmmakers we're admiring, or the opposite. And Napoleon's a fun case, because it's had at least 3 major soundtracks or arrangements composed for it. And if you saw the VHS version, I assume this will be the Francis Ford Coppola restoration, with a soundtrack by Carmina Coppola, his father, which I remember having a lot of military drumming in it. And I think Carmina said, because Napoleon's favorite instrument was the military drum, tells us a lot about Napoleon, it's a good idea that the soundtrack is covered in military drumming from pretty much beginning to end. This might be unfair. But what is your interpretation of Carmina Coppola's Napoleon accompaniment?
Right. Well, this is actually the LP of that score, which I found in a bargain bin in a record store. And of course, if I come across this thing, there's no universe in which I do not buy it. So my thought about that quote is, is that even true of Napoleon? Like, I can imagine if some journalist or biographer or important person is asking him a question, what's your favorite instrument? He wants something that's going to be on brand. Military drum is very on brand for him, and he was very shrewd about that kind of thing. But we also know he loved the opera. I'm not sure about his particular taste in music, but he was interested in the arts. So I kind of wonder, would that surely he didn't only want to listen to military drum music, and we know that he didn't. But the funny thing about the Coppola score is it's the one that I first encountered with the movie, and it was quite a long time, many years before I had access to anything else, because legal battles held up the release of any kind of DVD or streaming release in the United States. I think because of this score. I don't know all the
but yeah, that is true. As far as I'm aware, the score has caused a lot of problems because part of the reason the film is so short in the Coppola version is simply because the frame rate was made 24 rather than 20, which was Kevin Brownlaw's suggestion. And the reason for that is when they premiered it, I think it was in LA, but they could only rent the venue for about 4 hours until they had to pay the live orchestra overtime. And that would have really bankrupted everyone involved. So they thought, how can we make the film shorter? We could cut a scene, or we just make the whole thing run faster. And so Carmina's score was then composed to that version of the film. And Coppola, after that fact, especially after his father died, was very unwilling to let go of his father's score and therefore sort of extend the film back to a more natural frame rate. And so this is where begins this enormous sort of legal battle with the Kevin Brownlaw, with the Carl Davis soundtrack, which is more an arrangement of various contemporary-ish classical pieces. But so very curious, I mean, maybe classically Italian or Italian-American family got to stick it to the Coppolas. He's composed this thing and we're going to stick with it forever, even though it's the wrong frame rate, and we did it to not pay some violinists extra money. But continue with this, the imprint of the Coppola soundtrack.
But, of course, this is the soundtrack that imprinted on me, as you say, when I was a very young person and had fond memories of this movie. And you might remember that the Carl Davis score is concerned with being period appropriate. So all the music either comes from roughly Napoleon's time or it's a pastiche of those styles. Whereas Coppola, a lot of it sounds more like contemporary Hollywood, like a Gone with the Wind kind of thing. But the music for the snowball fight is, I think, is pretty good. It's almost Shostakovichian, kind of Bartokian. It's very spiky. It's very angular, and I remember liking it quite a lot. So when I first acquired the DVD that had the Carl Davis score and popped it in, I was listening to it, and it was some, I don't know what music he chooses, but it's
an early Mozart symphony. I can't remember which one.
Yeah, I think it's 25.
25, yeah.
Yeah, so I was watching it and I thought, this is not the snowball music I remember. And I actually think it doesn't fit the scene quite as well. And I was a little bit turned off, but of course, Carl Davis's score is on the whole much, much better. And like particularly the one theme that goes with Napoleon and that you hear when you see the eagle and when he's having all these victories is very stirring and very exciting, and it just took a little bit getting used to for me to square it off with my memories.
Yeah, there's a nice anecdote with that I think it's called like the theme of destiny or something, and because so much of the score is composed of these pastiches and quotations, and some of them are quite obscure. Like there are some very deep cuts through this classical romantic period. And Brownlaw would often sort of, watching the restoration with the new music, would be like, oh, where's this from? Where's this from? And he was really impressed with the theme of destiny. He said, where is that one from? That must be Beethoven. And Carl Davis could very humbly reply, no, that's one of mine. Mm-hmm. And, huge compliment to sort of thread yourself perfectly into this high romantic idiom. But nonetheless, very interesting. Now, I'll ask a question, because this version is partially due to all of these legal battles, not that widely seen yet. But have you watched a version or heard a version with the Cloquet-Lafoyer score, this is the new Cinematheque restoration, which is sort of emerging in recent years?
I have not had the good fortune to see it. I understand that it's a longer cut of the film with a new score, but I have not had the chance to see it.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing just about I've seen half of it, which is extremely inconvenient, because at the Bologna Film Festival, it's a repertory festival, on the year of Napoleon's new premiere. I mean, this is a film that can't stop premiering across 21st century. They decided to include the first half because it was to be performed in Paris on 2 days, part one, part two. But then they never showed the second half. And then the subsequent year, they also didn't show the second half. So I'm guessing it's just off the menu now. But worth knowing two things about it. One, while it is longer, it doesn't feature any additional material. What they did is when from the Coppola one to the Brownlaw one, which does have a couple of extra scenes, it's mostly just changing from 24 FPS to 20. And now from the Brownlaw to the Cinematheque, they've changed it from 20 to 18. So, we could get something like a 9-hour version if we just knock it down to 16, which is the true.
Like maybe a Andy Warhol style, how far can we slow it down before
yeah,
completely incomprehensible, and can we show it over 4 days and have people come in and out
with Morton Feldman music to make sure it fits. Yeah.
And is it superior? Because my feeling, seeing the Coppola one, and I'd imprinted on the Brownlaw Carl Davis one, so we're on opposite sides of the spectrum. But I found, for some reason, the film felt less important. And I think it might be because of the frame rate. Everyone is moving slightly faster. It's like those kind of Charlie Chaplin running up and down. They're running at the wrong frame rate, so everyone thinks it's silly. But having the whole film, all actions are just... And it's not really detectable. It doesn't look like everyone's running around fast motion. It seems normal. But maybe just having the extra gravitas of those, because it adds up to hours of time when you change just a few frames per second. And maybe the French notion is, if we make it 18, the gravitas will be overwhelming. This slow motion Napoleon will be like a giant on the mountains.
The eagle's wings flapping in slow mo.
Everything in slow mo.
Eyes are flashing. Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's an optimal frame rate for the optimal amount of gravitas if you plotted it on a graph.
Yeah, maybe it should change. It should move up and down. I mean, this is what silent films used to do quite a lot, which is a bit of a lost art, but they used to crank up and down to kind of, and it's hard to know what speed to project them at today because these things are sort of burnt in and were hand cranked and so on. The other important thing about the new version is we've got another arranged soundtrack. So no original music. I don't think any at all, just a bit of kind of joining pieces to attach things together. But this guy, Cloquet Lafoyer, which has probably been deeply mispronounced, he has forgotten Carl Davis's sort of temporal limitation. So he's pulling music from all over the place. I think there was some Penderecki in it during some of the storm sequences. We've got Vaughan Williams, which is, I think, an ingenious choice just before the Marseillaise reveal, the London Symphony. I just can't imagine a Frenchman thinking that is the music that will introduce the Marseillaise, but it's wonderful. But it sort of makes the film feel more 20th century and more 1920s. Because when you marry it to kind of modern Hollywood music, Coppola, or you marry it to early romantic themes like Davis, the film is either kind of contemporary or it feels Beethovenian. It almost feels like it's emerged from the Napoleonic era, despite everything. But suddenly when you listen to it with these like kind of late 19th, 20th century, like there's some Benjamin Britten, there's some other sort of English composers of that period, it has that sharp kind of vigorous avant-garde feeling to it that you don't get so much. I mean, there's Beethoven in the new version, but it's smoothed over. So how do you feel about the film in terms of its aesthetic presence? Where does it belong? Is this, in fact, a 19th century novel made into a movie about this great and impregnable Napoleon? Is it an avant-garde 1920s film with all of its kind of sharp editing and ingenious devices and almost sort of less rhyme and reason than just ingenuity? Or is it more like this James Cameron thing, a bit ahead of its time, a bit of a blockbuster before blockbusters?
I think part of what makes it so compelling is that you could make an argument for any of those. But that said, I think my one complaint with the Carl Davis score and wanting to choose only music from Napoleon's time is it gives it a bit of a limited color palette. And it's also a stance on, what should a film score be? And treating it like a period piece, like those orchestras that play with period instruments, for the sake of authenticity, doesn't necessarily seem like the correct choice to me, even if the score is very good, which Carl Davis's is. Like I think music from the time that it was made, that the film was made, is very appropriate. Music that feels like a blockbuster that is meant to ring, maximal emotional response from what's happening on the screen is also appropriate. Music that sounds like military marches is also appropriate. And I think it, like, even though it's kind of a chameleon, I think it really is, it's a film that could only have been made in the late 1920s, just because of that particular moment in filmmaking. Nothing else would have produced this kind of combination of very experimental camera work with the theatricality of the previous century. And something I think about a lot when I'm watching silent films and earlier Hollywood films is how much of the point of reference for people was vaudeville on the lowbrow end and opera on the highbrow end. And the way they communicate emotions, the way the actors communicate emotions, the way scenes are staged seems so clearly to come from theater a lot of the time. And that's part of why I like them so much, I think, that there's this operatic element, or, even that lowbrow vaudeville element as well, that's a language that has kind of disappeared from film, even though it still exists in opera productions, because opera is kind of stuck in time in a way.
What were some of the other late silent films that you pulled out of the video store back then, that's some of your other favorites from this period?
See, I really loved Greta Garbo, and I think she's another example of sort of like it's not that Albert Dudon is especially good looking, but he just has a very charismatic face, like yes. The eye wants to rest upon his face. And Greta Garbo has the same effect. You just want to look at her face, and the movies are all constructed around this desire, and they create all these beautiful images, these scenes that are just designed to be able to get her to make certain facial expressions, and wear beautiful clothes. And I think Flesh and the Devil.
Yeah, I love that film.
It's a really great one. I remember seeing The Wind with Lillian Gish. It's another one that's very focused on her face. I was really sad that I couldn't go back to New York to see Queen Kelly, which they were doing at Film Forum earlier this year. Because I think probably like a lot of people, I've only seen the little clips that appear in the movie Sunset Boulevard. But it seems like lots of fun.
Queen Kelly's an interesting one, I think, to bring in also with Napoleon, because it is like Napoleon, essentially. I mean, Napoleon maybe not in itself, but Queen Kelly is an unfinished film that was given a kind of stuck-on ending because production fell out. I mean, the Sunset Boulevard connection is kind of quite embodied, because Stroheim and the star, what's the name of the star again? Swanson, yeah. They fell out in a major way because Swanson had begun a production studio of her own right at the end of the silent era to sort of cash in on her star power and make some great films with Stroheim, who had fallen out of favor but was still considered a man capable of great art. And they tried to make this Queen Kelly thing, and the fallout was immense. And so Stroheim was fired, and they reshot a new ending, and this kind of interesting but incomplete artifact came out. And I think it was released in something like 1930. So by then, no one cared about silent films, and it was almost like the kind of battered up corpse of an art form. And to pull back Stroheim and Swanson for Sunset Boulevard and then pull that footage, I really wonder what emotions they were feeling at the time personally, and whose archive did they get the footage from? Did they say, Stroheim, we need some Queen Kelly, can you get it out? This massive traumatic, because after this, Stroheim left America and left Hollywood to France to kind of swan around there for a while. But it really was a kind of he acted in some small sound films as well. But back to Napoleon, if Queen Kelly is kind of a sad, broken, here, we're going to give you this after silent era is done and you're not going to care about it. But Napoleon is sort of like the final shot of this enormous canon. And I agree with what I feel like you're suggesting, that silent cinema towards the end of the 20s had actually only just picked up its advanced and complex grammar. They were doing things then that they wouldn't do again for decades after the kind of sound film reset. So you have Napoleon 1 of 5, which is meant to be this, probably the biggest film project ever made at that time, or very close to it, that uses every single trick in the book. And when we get to the end, the film triples in length. It's 3 cameras sort of stuck together to get this insane pre-cinemascope widescreen effect. And you never know like what he would have done with that in sequels and how he might have used it. So it's sort of simultaneously the triumph of the silent era. This is sort of the greatest thing ever made, but also dead halfway. And it represents an art form that was lost. I mean, it never made its other 4 parts. We're left with this. And I think for me, it's a case of when you see films of the early 1930s, sound films, they feel like the very primitive version of films we watch today. You sort of see them creeping out of the primordial soup and growing their arms and legs and then developing language. And it's the same grammar then as now. Whereas when you watch silent films, it's a different form. It's not just movies were like this and then we figured out how to put the voices in. It has a completely different approach. As you say, operatic and vaudevillian. The way scenes are shot and developed is different. You can't have the same kind of narratives. You can't have these super complex novelistic narratives unless you do the Fritz Lang million-word long intertitles, which we all know kind of doesn't work with the medium. And unlike most art forms like theatre and opera, well, opera, you even said it, sort of lived on in a semi-unchanged state in the background. Theatre lived on when film came and kind of took the main popular medium. But silent film, which I think we could define as a separate medium to sound film, it didn't continue. It just stopped suddenly in its tracks. I'm not sure we have any other example of an art form that just stopped and was replaced by a similar but fundamentally different product. And later we started integrating silent film stuff back into the sound films, and it's not unheard of. But how do you feel about Napoleon as a kind of end stop to silent cinema, to an art form, to a means of expression?
I will say if that's the send-off that silent films get, then it's a wonderful one. And I'm glad that we have this artifact. And it would have been wonderful if we'd had the rest of it, but it also doesn't feel quite like an unfinished project to me. It ends with this explosion of images and excitement. And one thing that struck me while I was watching it is the technique where there are a couple of scenes where you see Napoleon's face in close-up, and superimposed on top of it are a bunch of drawings and maps and quickly moving things, which is a technique that has come back much later to signify that someone is very intelligent, that their mind is working. And you see mathematical formulas and things like that. And when it ends, you feel very riled up. You're ready to go invade Italy. You're ready to go into war with
big time.
And it feels very exciting and wonderful. And you think, oh, wouldn't it be great to go to war? And as the culmination of everything that silent film was building towards, where you could have these kinds of expressions that are melodramatic and theatrical, along with a very advanced visual language and techniques that you just don't see anymore, like tinting the film blue to signify that it's nighttime. It's like stepping into another world, into another language, another way of expressing that is so strange and beautiful, and was extinguished so soon. but
The tinting's very strange, isn't it? It just completely disappears with sound. Yeah, and also what you were saying about faces, I have a similar feeling to you, perhaps, that in silent films, as Norma Desmond says in Sunset Boulevard, then we had faces. And you can stare with more rapture at the lineaments and minor muscle movements of these mostly long dead faces with sort of more strange rapture than you can with modern film stars. There's a strange sort of ghostliness to its intimacy. One of my favorite things about Napoleon is actually something that you don't think about much with silent films is the casting. I love the way everyone looks. That Robespierre guy, what a face. All three of them, Robespierre, Danton, and Marat, just look wonderful. All those Italian kind of background guys like Salicetti and Pozzi di Borgo and Albert Didon. I've only ever seen this word written down in the lead role. Also, such a strange, dark, eerie beauty. Yeah, you can really get lost in them. As with
Abel Gance himself as Saint-Just, with this sort of earring thing going on. I think, what a wonderful performance. It didn't need to be. It could have just been pure vanity, but wonderful stuff.
His wife plays Charlotte Corday, right?
I think so. Yeah, it was a real family affair.
Yeah, and she has a real face as well. Very memorable.
Yeah.
And what do you think of the film's depiction? And this is really in the latter half. So while you're sort of inculcated to it, and to a degree, you're really used to seeing the greatest shot you've ever seen every 10 minutes or so, and then we get this quite domestic aside where it is and this is really, I guess, another seed being planted in a way, but the Josephine romance. And some have said the Napoleon Josephine romance in reality is one of the great romances of our time. I don't know about that. But in the film, it's sort of pink and purple tinged. There are swings and meadows and
petals kind of falling continuously for about 20 minutes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And what do you make of this aside? Is this something that would have been developed? Is this just Abel Gance becoming a mad romantic before the military drumming of the last, could be hour, could be half an hour? I'm invading Italy. I don't know. But yeah, what do we feel about this sequence towards the end?
Well, so when I went to see Napoleon in New York, there were these two guys sitting behind me who had never seen it, and they were chatting with each other. And beforehand, one of the guys was saying to his friend, oh, I mean, it's going to be so long, and I think I'll sneak out after the first intermission and go gallivant in the park, is what he said. He used the word gallivant. He said, and then maybe I'll come back toward the end when Napoleon is getting smashed by the Russians. And I thought, oh, he's going to be very disappointed if that's what he does. But after, like, when we got to the first intermission, he was so excited. He was saying that was electric. I can't believe what I saw. It's amazing, and was very, very excited to keep watching this film. But then there was another intermission after the whole Josephine sequence, which we've just talked about. And this guy behind me was very disappointed in what he had seen. It's like, oh, this is just a soap opera. This is boring. I liked it when they were doing the snowball fight, but I guess I'll stay to the end. But I'm not really very excited about it. So I was getting a real-time reaction to someone who had never seen it before, who really enjoyed the more Napoleonic parts of Napoleon, but did not like this interlude with this courtship of Josephine. And I don't really feel the same way. Maybe I think I joked in one of my newsletter pieces that it's because I'm a woman and I like love stories more than war stories. But I do think that it's very differently paced. And it takes on a kind of rom-com element where you can see Josephine isn't really sure about this crazy man who's courting her, and she's not that into him, but he's so excited, he's in love, he's petting her little dog, and that scene is very funny where he she comes to visit him with her dog, and he's trying to act natural, but it's impossible for him. And he pets the dog in the most awkward way you can think of. And I think, it again, it's like those blockbuster movie techniques where you need an interlude to break the tension. You need a B plot. But also, I think the sequence at the victim's ball is so orgiastic and so visually interesting and so 1920s. It's like people's imaginings of a Great Gatsby party. It's almost like that Baz Luhrmann sequence.
Or Bob Fosse, or
yeah, like Bob Fosse. There are petals falling everywhere. People are dancing. All the women are costumed like flappers. They've got these headdresses. And for me, those are some of the most memorable sequences. And I have a lot of patience for things like that. And so I will say, I do not have the reaction that those guys behind me did. I think the Josephine sequences are part of the whole effect, and also, we as an audience know what happens between them, and it's one of the only parts of the movie that allows itself a little bit of irony, that allows Napoleon to be less than godlike for a few minutes, and coming as it does before the final sequence, which is all flag waving and eagles and spinning globes and everything else. I think it's the right palate cleanser before that finale.
You said in a brief email correspondence that your favorite, at any rate, your favorite large, intimidating book is In Search of Lost Time. Another work left kind of unfinished, more finished than the Napoleon. It's closer to the end than that, but it is nevertheless kind of interesting that your tastes tend toward things that have slightly frayed edges, maybe slightly. Even if they're emotionally finished, there's still something left hanging at the end. Do you think this is just a part of your taste, or is it just a coincidence?
Possibly. It's funny to think about In Search of Lost Time, because in terms of temporality, it's not very far apart from the Napoleon film. And they're both very French, but In Search of Lost Time is almost the opposite in terms of its emotional effect. It depends on these infinitesimally fine distinctions in interactions between people and what they're feeling, and the very precise flavor of emotions and thoughts, and it's highly ironic and very, very subtle, and rewards careful reading. It's not trying to just blow you away with scale, even though it is also huge.
Yeah, it's very self-conscious, is my impression. Whereas Napoleon, zero self-conscious. It has no idea that it's even a movie. It thinks it's reality.
Yeah.
It's no poring over each individual decision and scene. It's just the next.
Yeah, and it doesn't want you to think too hard about it. But in terms of unfinishedness, I think I do really enjoy things that have something for the mind to chew on a bit, that aren't perfectly tidy, that where you can see the work of a human hand that is flawed and imperfect, and you can see decisions being made by the author. I actually happened to read 2 novels last year that actually are unfinished and that break off in very awkward places without knowing that they were unfinished when I started reading them. And one of them was The Confessions of Felix Krull, which ends on a bit of a cliffhanger. And yes. I had no idea that that's what was going to happen. So I was getting close to the end of the book and thinking like, well, he's going to have to wrap up this plot line with the daughter pretty soon, because we're almost at the end of the book, and then it just doesn't wrap up. And the other was Sunflower by Rebecca West, which I don't think a lot of people read, but
I've never heard of it. No.
yeah, it's a fictionalized account of her romance slash unrequited obsession for Lord Beaverbrook. And the novel gets to the point where she's yearning for this man. She thinks she's going to have a wonderful life forever if he will finally admit his love for her. And then they have a tryst, and the heroine, she thinks everything's going to be wonderful after this, like her life is going to change and everything's going to be better. And then the novel abruptly breaks off, but you can tell that it's not going to be it's not going to work out well for her. There are a few things that foreshadow that, and you can imagine that she got to the point where she would have to write about the painful morning after, and the painful rejection to come, and that emotionally she just couldn't do it. She set it aside and thought, well, I'll come back to this later because it's too difficult to write about, and then just never came back to it. And it's very I almost prefer it that way because it's so suggestive. You know that this horrible thing is about to come, and then it just breaks off, I think, because she couldn't deal with it.
It gives it a similar structure to Napoleon as well. Rise and rise and rise and rise.
That's right.
And, cut.
And so nothing bad ever happens to this guy.
It's interesting as well. I mean, it's into that sort of Keatsian heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. If Napoleon had been followed by 4 other movies, some of which good, some all right, and the third one, really like the fourth, if it becomes that kind of thing, suddenly it's really grounded. It's in the earth, and we have to consider it in reality. And maybe that would have been ultimately better. But to have this kind of astounding artifact, which we know is one of 5, and does, as Jack says, just rise and rise and rise, then goes into sort of infinity. We can only imagine that the other films would be composed completely of infinity. And maybe we're happier with this version of Napoleon, the version that does clamber up to the highest possible pitch. And then our brain has to assume there are actually higher pitches that we didn't allow it to clamber to. And we can kind of revel in that. It's sort of like the greatest books and films ever made are typically the ones that weren't made, but they sound wonderful. If only someone had gotten around to making that. And Napoleon's one where they did make a bit of it. They made enough of it that it feels extremely real and embodied, but not so much that we have to face with the fact that, he didn't really do the fall that well. The Josephine stuff got out of it. There's not enough of it for us to get into that mood. I mean, can we think of any good or maybe even great works that would be better if they were unfinished? I think this is certainly true. Titanic, but the boat never crashes. What a nice day out.
I think
and then there's go on.
Saying I think novelists experiment with that kind of thing sometimes, where the bad thing is coming for them, but it never actually arrives. But what it makes me think of is that actors who die young and seemingly when they're on the brink of going on to even greater accomplishments sometimes become these cult figures because what we imagine they might have done is going to be perfect compared to the actors who we see grow old and start making bad movies and make maybe they wind up having questionable politics or all kinds of things, and don't become tarnished by growing old, being human, and that's what your comment about Napoleon makes me think of, is that we never had to see it become imperfect, and it's unlikely that Gance would have been able to sustain that kind of pitch through how many 4 more films, maybe each of them also 5 hours long. There are probably things
gradually getting worse. That would be just be kind of torturous.
The problem of the American television show with the great first series and the next 2 are pretty promising, and it would have rounded off nicely there, but because of kind of American mindset, it has to go on forever. And then you're like there for 10 series, slowly watching this thing you love drain the color, and you can't quite quit because you're so invested, but you just, God, if only it ended. And it's the sense of careers. If only they died. What a great artist we'd remember them as.
Yeah.
But they went on living, they went on producing. It feels very cynical to put it like that, but it does seem true, at least in some cases. Then you get someone like Janacek or Cecily Frank, and then suddenly, if they died early, they would have died as a complete blank in history. But they managed to last until that nice final segment, as it were. Even Napoleon, imagine Napoleon had died before the whole emperor fiasco. We wouldn't even be able to put the asterisk. We would have to acknowledge this is the greatest man there ever was.
Right. What a shame that he was cut down so young. Yeah.
Yeah.
It could just be
Maybe
like
Napoleon would have preferred that in retrospect.
yeah,
Though
but,
he probably still would have wanted to be emperor.
yeah. There's something about like unfinished classicism that suits us a lot more. I think like Goya paintings or Da Vinci sketches where all you get is a bit of hand and like half a face and the rest is all just a wash of colors. And this suits modern kind of aesthetic sensibilities so much better. I mean, the most popular movement, at least in terms of sort of gallery cues and reproduction, I would argue, is Impressionism, especially if you're including Van Gogh. And even the word Impressionism is implying this unfinished quality. I think that's even like what an implication of the word in French, that it's not the finished painting, it's just the impression of it. And yeah, maybe it's because photography finishes off the whole realistic paintings project. The whole of realistic artwork is finished. The end has come, and yeah, and we're left with an attachment, a strange, sentimental attachment to those images, which imply the unfinished, the imperfect, the human.
Yeah, and it seems like an idea that originates in Romanticism. This idea that what is unfinished or what is not polished is more authentic, is somehow more true or more real, because the artifice that all this polishing and finishing implies brings it further and further away from the original inspiration. And I think writers who deliberately write in fragments, or who write novels of fragments, or who confine themselves to aphoristic-like statements, are trying to get there. But then sometimes I think it doesn't quite achieve the same effect, because if you start thinking about what's there, like if you're passing over a lot of fragments and you stop to think, wait, is this a true statement? Like, does this resonate? Or is it something that is in the language of a pithy, or that it has the shape of a pithy aphorism, or the shape of a profound insight, but doesn't quite reach that point? Sometimes the absence of the polish and the care and the thinking, sometimes it's just sloppy, but when it achieves what it's trying to achieve, it's very wonderful.
It makes me think of Sappho a little bit, this poet who is almost completely preserved in fragments. And I wonder really what the Sappho would be if we just had her complete poetry, which I think would appear a lot more conventional, at least of the period, stylistically speaking. But instead, we have all of these very alluring snips and snaps, which again, like Jack was saying, feels more modern, because it's something a modern might try to reproduce themselves, sort of self-consciously. What would a really telling fragment be? But there's something that can't be replicated, as you say, by authentic fragments, which is to say, time kind of preserves some of these things in quotations, and some of them in sort of partial manuscripts, and we haven't been able to discern them, and we have to basically take what we can from them. And then the artwork of Sappho is not just Sappho and not just Sappho's time, but also the intervening time, this massive filtration. And I suppose what we appreciate isn't just the artist herself or her talent, but also just the way the talent has been warped. And I feel perhaps even Napoleon, the same thing applies. At least for me, when I watch a late silent film, I'm always thinking end of an era, final statement, go out with a bang. And so when you find something that really does sort of gel with these notions, suddenly it's not just a film about this French guy, but it's a collection of artistic force, and it's a memory. It's a big tombstone, but a good one. This enormous sort of statue.
Right.
And I wonder just yeah, how much this filters through our appreciation of art in general, how much we kind of borrow from time, borrow from context, and sort of impute it in the maker.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of examples of artists and writers who are not very well appreciated in their own time, but then are beloved later because our tastes now match up with whatever they were doing, or because time has eroded what they did to the point that it now appears mysterious to us, and our minds filling in the blanks of what's actually there makes for a more interesting artistic experience than something complete would have been. And thinking about Napoleon, I'm not sure we would have gained a whole lot by, recovering the scene where he makes cardboard boots for himself, which is the one gap that they fill in with title cards. And another thing that makes me a little skeptical of, if we find more and more lost footage, does it lose some of its power? Because we don't really need to see him making boots out of cardboard, or his interactions with these minor figures. And this is I'm just kind of rambling a bit, but I know something that people say about Emily Dickinson is she was writing in this very fragmented way, and it's not like her work has been lost, but she's much more popular now than she was in her own time, because we're accustomed now to this kind of writing, where a lot of things are broken off, a lot of things are jumbled and unfinished, because we associate that with authenticity, rightly or wrongly, and with something that's real instead of tainted by, capitalism or society, or these sources of artifice and warping, and that's not necessarily a function of the quality of her poetry so much as the way our understanding and our tastes change to match up with different things from the past, that the way we think about them belongs firmly to our own time.
There is a counterexample to the taste for the fragmentary, the taste for the unfinished. That's in music. We've been talking about how it works in narrative art, how it works in poetry. We love fragmentary poetry, but fragmentary music, something with an unresolved cadence, has a special kind of unpleasantness and strangeness to us. I'm thinking particularly of the composer Alexander Scriabin, who left this gigantic, unfinished work called Mysterium, which wasn't just for music, but was going to be like a multimedia piece, including lasers, and it was going to be played in the Himalayas and was going to end the world. A great, contrast between the amount of ambition he had and what he actually achieved. And what he achieved is just these squiggly fragments of music with rising cadences that don't really fall in any instances. We get the impression it's going to have a Tristan-like eventual arc up towards some ridiculous ecstasy and resolution, but we don't get the resolution. And that's significantly more uncomfortable for an audience in music than it is in other mediums. I've never been to a performance of Mahler's 10th or Mozart's Requiem where they only play what Mahler wrote or they only play what Mozart wrote. That's just, we need some kind of finished version of it. Otherwise, it feels too unpleasant to hear the first 10 bars of the Lacrimosa and then silence.
Yeah, I think it can be an almost physical discomfort, waiting for a cadence to resolve. And of course, Wagner exploited that to great effect. Yeah, I think there is the very human, kind of almost physical need to see a point of tension resolved. And I think sometimes what's going on with these fragmentary works that people like is the greatest point of tension has an implied resolution, like one that we can easily imagine, or it doesn't do the work of bringing things to a high point of tension in the first place, such that having it break off creates an unsatisfying feeling. Like I think we still don't like it when a movie ends, just before the big, fight with the villain. I think that still makes people feel angry when that happens. But yeah, music, I think maybe because the experience of listening to it, unless you're a musicologist and a big nerd, kind of bypasses the mind and is meant to evoke a kind of feeling or a kind of sensation, listening to chords resolve. And I think also the beat, you want to hear the beat repeat.
And perhaps it's sort of on the layering, and I remember Kierkegaard gets into this in Either Or, but he sort of created a power ranking of the different art forms on a kind of intellectual to sensual level. And his sort of a qualitative argument there I'll ignore, but he puts music as one of the most sensual rather than intellectual forms, which I think is essentially true. When you read part of a poem or part of a novel, you can kind of fill in the intellectual content, maybe, at least if you're of that bent, more easily. Whereas if you're just being swept up in this hugely emotional, you're just following the sounds and where they're going. While you can in your head imagine, and then at the end it goes da da da. You can do that, but it's nowhere near feeling the live sort of it's in time. This was another thing that Kierkegaard spoke about in terms of music, and he probably would have included films in that category. But it's in time. It's not merely abstract on the page. It's how fast you read. You can revisit. You can look at it again. It is there, and then it's not there. Sort of music on a page isn't really music as experienced. And I feel like maybe looking at, say, Mahler's 10th on the page is less annoying in its fragmentary nature if you are the kind of person who can immediately understand what they're looking at. If you can just see the unfinished bars and think, right, so this fragment goes here and here, and you can imagine it going like that. But if you're sitting in a room and hearing it, it's like psychic violence to just have it kicked apart. And maybe with the film, if Napoleon ended 20 minutes earlier and you'd be like, oh, is that it? But it's also because you are in time. Whereas I think if you have that ending of Napoleon in a sort of novelistic form, there could be something sort of, oh, that's interesting. It just stops. And you can imagine the whole career of Napoleon written in so many words. I don't think it's so clear cut as this, but I think there's an interesting difference going on, maybe between the things which move despite us and the things that move because of us, and what we bring to fragmentary works. I don't think we look at the fragment and think that's a nice fragment, but we imagine the lost poem, and we're sort of maybe moved by its absence or moved by what it might have said, and we probably prefer what it might have said more than what it does or what it would have said originally.
And a poem is not always telling a story where we expect there to be escalating action followed by a climax, followed by a resolution. So a poem or a work of philosophy, or something that, yeah, is more intellectual. I think you're right. I think we can tolerate fragmentation more than in music. And like, I think Napoleon is only fragmentary in the sense that we know that Gance wanted to do more. But if you had no knowledge of the background of how it was made and what his plans were, it finishes on this high note. He's finally allowed to take charge of an army. He's finally permitted to invade Italy, and everything is wonderful. And you get the big finale. And
in musical
maybe if you're
terms, it ends with an assonant chord. It's not some strange dissonant yearning chord. It's end of the first act, boom, which has that cadence built into it. Yeah, I think it tends to be it's less to do with it actually being unfinished an artwork and more to do with that different ways of something breaking off. Napoleon ends very much on a peak that it knows is a peak. And if you are doing that kind of fragmentary thing, especially in music, it needs to be intentional. You can't cut off like the last 7 minutes of Turandot. You can't just cut there. You need at very least to just modulate back to the home chord for the ending. Not even necessarily because of the plot. You can leave all the characters in Turandot where they are on stage. That's fine. Just we need some sort of final chord there. I'm thinking of the end of Mahler's Das Lied von der Erde. We get this that ends beautifully with an intentional fragmentary phrase. So we get the mezzo sings this ewig, ewig, da 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 da. A few times, and then we only get the first half of it. We just get ewig, ewig, and it fades beautifully away. And the word, of course, means eternity, and it's the form beautifully matched to the material and exploiting the disappointment in the phrase not landing in the most kind of transcendent, gorgeous way. Yeah, but in films and narrative, it's more cloying.
Yeah, there's a great segment in Renata Adler's Speedboat, where a friend tells her he's got a surprise for her, and the surprise turns out to be that he's taking her to a performance of Parsifal, and she's very alarmed because she is not going to enjoy seeing this performance of Parsifal. But then she writes about the experience of being very, very bored and waiting for it to end. And there's the long sequence where Parsifal has brought back the spear, and he's talking with I forget the other guy's name, about how now that he's brought the spear back, the king is going to be able to be healed, and everything's going to be wonderful again. And she writes that she's watching this very long scene and that she's thinking to herself, more than I want the opera to end, and I really do want it to end, but more than that, I want them to bring the king his spear. So I think about that a lot, where she just really wanted to see this thing come to completion in a narrative way, and not just to be able to leave the theater, even though she also wanted that. So sometimes it comes into my mind if I'm watching a very long movie that seems to be dragging on. Can they bring the king his spear?
Yeah. I think it might be an interesting time to turn back to Napoleon, not the Abel Gance film of 1927, but the man and the many other artworks that he has produced across the 19th century and the 20th century and the 21st century. I believe I read somewhere, and this is mostly regarding silent films, that no figure has had more films made about him. Potentially Jesus, but in the early years, he was a very famous figure to just put on a bicorn hat and then call it Napoleon Rides Again. And then you've got an instant movie, and we've got many novels many paintings, many. I think we've got operas as well. I think we've got all kinds of things. But I think War and Peace, yeah, the opera of the novel of the history. It's sort of a nice snaky fashion there. And I'd like to start actually with our most recent edition. I think it's the most recent, which is the Ridley Scott Napoleon film, which I do have feelings for, which are rather unusual. But at first, I'll begin with what are your feelings for what we could call almost the opposite of Abel Gance's Napoleon in terms of its feelings for Bonaparte?
I will say that I could not finish it.
Don't give the king his spear.
Don't give it.
No. Well, I know what happens to Napoleon, so it's all right. But I think I gave up after he divorces Josephine. But I did not like it. And this is maybe very petty of me, but I couldn't handle all the American accents. They said guillotine instead of guillotine, which aggravated me a lot. So yeah, I respect the approach he took, which is the opposite of, the tack that Gance took, where it's like, what if Napoleon was a creepy loser who just kind of failed upward, and he's only venerated because he happened to be in the right place at the right time, and what if he was just a very strange man who arrived at a particular point in history. But I don't think it was executed in a way that made it interesting to me. And he didn't seem really very interested in Napoleon as a figure and what he means. So yeah, I was very put off by it, but I would be very willing to hear defenses of it and other takes on it.
Yeah, I wonder if I'll stage my defense, but I will say I agree that it has little to do with history, much in the way I suppose that Abel Gance's film has little to do with history and more to do with using Napoleon as your lever for a certain idea. And maybe the Abel Gance idea is that great men can save the universe, or at least, they're worthy, they're moving statues. And the Ridley Scott idea is maybe there are no great men, or if there are, the ones we celebrate as great men are mass murderers and probably psychotic lunatics because of that. The film ends, you missed this bit, but the film ends with a big list of all the casualties in all the battles Napoleon was involved in, and it sort of totaled both sides, put it in one, and sort of, I guess, remembers him as a man who just managed to kill lots of other men. And that's sort of all there, which is not historically how we should necessarily imagine Napoleon, but it's an interesting way to because of our great men, how many of them are warlords? We love Alexander the Great. What did he do? Killed a lot of people, basically. And it's an interesting link because I'd sort of almost forgotten that Shelley has actually a very similar notion of Napoleon to Ridley Scott. It's the sense of this tyrant. And I think with people of Shelley's generation, there was a sense of betrayal that Napoleon had begun as a symbol of something they could get behind. Beethoven originally dedicating the Third Symphony to Napoleon, and then this enormous turnaround that he has become the beast, as it were. So you have the Shelley and the Scott interpretations, which I think are pretty violent, pretty vigorous. But what other, especially in the 19th century, I suppose, versions of Napoleon emerge in art? How do people explain him or justify him?
I think, first of all, if you're in England, I think you grow up with a very different story about Napoleon and what he represented, because he was directly threatening their country the whole time. And the Ridley Scott take, and probably closer to accurate take, where he abandoned his liberal ideals as soon as they came into conflict with his personal power, is certainly a better story for our moment right now, because how many times do we see this with much lesser personalities, but much people who have a lot more power. And like, I'm thinking about the other depictions of Napoleon. There's a Greta Garbo movie that depicts his romance with Marie Walewska that is modestly pro-Napoleon and kind of treats him as more of a tragic figure. And there's like the popular novel Desiree, which is about which I read as a young girl. That where he's kind of a shadowy but charismatic figure. And I think like I'm not sure if I have a very coherent view of this, but I think what makes him appealing to tell stories about is that he does have this tragic arc. Like he does genuinely seem to have been a very remarkable person who was also very flawed, who accomplished a lot of things, but also destroyed many lives, and who had an understanding of himself that was missing very important parts. Mm-hmm. And I recently read a biography of Napoleon. I forget the author, but it's a more recent one, and it's maybe problematically pro-Napoleon, but it has these anecdotes about him, during the period of his downfall that are very in keeping with this idea of a tragic hero who has a fatal flaw that undoes him. Like the one I remember is where he really wants to become a monarch, and he really wants a dynasty, and he has a son, the King of Rome. And while he's in Russia and everything is going disastrously, someone back in Paris is planning a coup, and they spread a rumor that Napoleon has died, so that their faction can take power. And Napoleon hears about this, and he starts saying to the people around him, like, "Well, if I was dead, my son would be king. What about my son? He would be the ruler in my place." And from seeing the reactions of the people around him and realizing that this had not even really occurred to them, and realizing that no one actually takes a dynasty seriously, no one really takes the idea that he's a king seriously, is very upsetting, but very revealing to him. And in the book, it said that evening he takes the memoir that he's been writing about his life and throws it all in the fire, because he realizes that it's all come to nothing. He's not going to have a dynasty. He's not going to have the legacy that he thought he was going to have, and he knows this, but is unwilling to face it. And though it's maybe too romantic, and maybe the Ridley Scott version is a good corrective, saying we shouldn't have any romantic ideas whatsoever about Napoleon. Mm-hmm. He was a warmonger and a narcissist, who happened to step into a power vacuum that he could exploit. But I think if that's all he was, he wouldn't be interesting.
And I wonder, just to jump in there, and this will just expand on what you're saying, I hope. But I wonder if this is why we find Napoleon fascinating, just culturally, in a way that someone like Charles V, who has a footprint in art and whose sort of failed European project is of a similar, if not even more significant scale than Napoleon's. But Charles V is not a figure who creates infinite artistic interpretations. And he doesn't, despite, a lot of quite romantic incidences in his life story, especially if you sort of print the legend, offering to duel with other heads of states and such. But we're not so fascinated by him. And is it because of these contradictions and because of this man having the tragic fall? I mean, there's something I often find quite unbelievable about Napoleon. I think if Napoleon were written down and not history, it would be criticized as quite naive. Oh, you mean he was defeated and then he came back? with a full army, and then they had another final battle. Yeah, all right, pull the other one. But then it happened, and we have to reckon with the fact it happened and try and understand it. And again, maybe someone like Charles V, who is, I think, quite remarkable in European history, makes a lot more sense to us. What is it, do you think, within the answer you're already giving, that brings Napoleon, of the many European warlords over the many centuries, he is the one that everyone knows and everyone is interested in?
Perhaps it's that he had the good luck to come of age at the beginning of the Romantic era. And on the heels of the French Revolution, when there was really a sense that society was changing in a permanent way, and that old ideas were receding and new ideas were rising, and everything was about to get swept away. And it was easy for people to believe at one point that he was the personification of all of that. So he can stand in for a lot of ideals, and all of the ways those ideals are flawed, like all of the problems with liberal humanism. You can also use Napoleon as a vehicle to discuss those, and I think his extraordinary success followed by extraordinary fall at a time when people were looking for ways to explain history and ways to talk about what a post-aristocratic world order would look like. Invest him with all this extra power, extra stuff.
Yeah, he's synchronous also, his historical legacy with the growth of sort of the European bourgeoisie. In Thomas Mann's Buddenbrooks, the Tony Buddenbrook has a sort of fling, never quite consummated, with a young man called Morton, who's a free thinker from Travemünde, which is close to where Mann grew up in Lübeck. It's, a family history novel. And this character, Morton, is trying to explain to Tony, who's very disinterested in these things, how much inspiration Napoleon gave young men of his generation, not because of what he did, but just for the sheer fact of him doing anything and not being an aristocrat. Him not being born into any particular station of life, but being able to move the world, vibed extraordinarily well with this bourgeois mentality of young bourgeois businessmen and free thinkers and revolutionaries. And as Milo was saying, it's extraordinary that this is all real. It has a level of operatic grandeur to it. This whole arc of European history that seems like richer than any one interpretation you could put on it, and therefore infinitely reinterpretable. It's not true of all dramatic history. It's not true of all cataclysmic war that it goes into people's spirits in quite the same way, and defines how people think about themselves. Yeah. Could we move on just in this sort of final section to some of your own stuff you're writing at the moment, Cecily? Like you're one of these full-time employment people who's writing, I think a novel. You've done quite a few short stories. What do you try to do with your writing? What are you trying to achieve with it, or what? Yeah.
I think with the newsletter, it really started out because I wanted to be able to communicate with my friends. I just moved away from Canada into the United States, and I didn't have anyone to talk to about what I was reading and what I was thinking. So I started a newsletter that was not on Substack. It was only for my friends, but I just needed somewhere to put my ideas down. And And then I started the Substack years later for some of the same reasons. It was during COVID. I was reading a lot, and I didn't have anyone to talk to at the time about what I was reading. And working in tech, you do meet people who are interested in some of the same things that I am, but not a whole lot of them, and not in any great concentration. So I wanted to get my ideas down, and it was very important to me that I be able to follow my own interests. So I thought, I'm not going to worry about subscriber numbers. I'm not going to worry about crafting the perfect subject line that will improve my open rates. I'm not going to worry about writing about something like the Napoleon movie that might have a small audience. Mostly I want to be able to articulate my interests in my thinking and in a way that's satisfying to me. And in my fiction writing, it's not easy to get traditionally published. It's not easy to get into literary journals, but similarly, it was important to me that I be able to follow the compass of my own interest, and to stay as close as possible to what I found interesting, rather than trying to fit a template of a story. And wanting to be able to follow my instincts. And the novel, it's actually kind of relevant to our Napoleon conversation. In my newsletter, I said I didn't want to talk about it, but because it actually has a direct tie-in with the Napoleon movie, I will here. One of the scenes in the movie that I think is very strong and that really stayed with me after I saw it, and there was a long period when I couldn't see Napoleon because it wasn't available, is the scene where Charlotte Corday murders Marat in his bathtub. And I thought a lot about that scene. I thought a lot about Charlotte Corday and thinking about, well, she was a middle-class girl from the provinces, respectably brought up. It seems like she had no accomplices. She was just acting out of a belief that she was doing a very important thing. And she was very convinced that killing this guy was going to bring peace to France. And she'd written a letter to her father where she apologizes. I'm sorry that I've disposed my life in this way, but I think it's the best thing I could do with my life. And I try to imagine, what would someone living today who was capable of doing something like that, and who was a woman, what would she be like? So I created a character who winds up deciding that the best thing to do with her life is to kill the CEO of a company. And the character of the novel winds up, she's not really very, very much like Charlotte Corday. She's very influenced by tech rationalism, in a way that's kind of disturbing and sinister and not very idealistic. And I will say I started it back in 2023, so before Luigi Mangione. And then when that happened, I thought, oh God, there are going to be 20 guys writing Luigi novels, and it'll seem like I'm just trying to do some rip from the headlines thing. But I'm very happy with how it's turned out. I don't know if it will ever be read, but again, I wanted to really follow the compass of my own interest and try to think about, what kinds of ideas could lead someone to this point. So it's a character study.
And it's very close in her head. It's all like what she's thinking.
It's a first-person narrative that she writes as a confession, where she tries to explain, here's why I did this thing, and the intention is for the reader to read it and think like, oh my God, she's completely unhinged, but she doesn't realize it. So,
and is this kind of in the world of sort of maybe just in the brain space of effective altruism. And this, if you're familiar with these guys, yeah, and this sense of sort of building probabilistic trees out, which can justify all activity based on some obscure, ultimate, but calculated good. So you can say, well, you know, it's worth doing this because in 300 years it will benefit humanity. Whereas if we just save the poor now, then 300 years it's all kind of over. And this being a real thing people believe, not just sort of Kooksville, but sort of billions of dollars is in this headspace.
Ultra utilitarian place that goes in some very sinister directions. There's some of that, but also there are some, pseudo Nietzschean, like imagine someone who's read Nietzsche but not really understood it, ideas about nobility and conducting yourself nobly, and part of it is being willing to die, and contrasting that with all these tech people who are very obsessed with longevity and not dying, and which is the nobler course. So that may or may not sound interesting to anybody, but I had a lot of fun writing it, and I.
No, I'd love a PDF if one is going. I liked. There was almost a kind of like slightly comic Nietzschean tone in The Good Sport, with this need to really cover up your weakness at all costs. Maybe it's just because most of the women in my life, or that I've been intimate with, don't tend to be the kind of women that are often in groups of women. That sort of groups of women literature it almost feels like reading cultural manners and niceties from like Ming China. I'm just so out of this this world that was in the short story, and almost Proustian as well in the micro analysis of one's behaviors. I found it really funny and kind of really enjoyable. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you read it.
Is Amelia real? Is there someone called Amelia? I hope her real name is Amelia.
I will say it's based on a actual trip that I took where it was a group of women, and there was another woman who the others didn't like. And long after that trip, I was thinking about, okay, why didn't people like her? What was going on? Because she wasn't mean to anybody. She didn't do anything wrong. But it was a very visceral experience. Knowing that this dynamic is taking place and trying to tease out the subtleties of it. And I was trying to do something kind of Proustian, think, okay, what exactly is going on? What exactly are people feeling and saying? So
it doesn't go the easy way out in the end, which would be to create a broadly sympathetic base to understand in that kind of beyond the self, everyone has their reasons. Look, this person may seem annoying, but really they're in their own universe in which this annoying stuff is actually quite minor. But actually the note the story ends on is like, no, I hate this person. I gave it a good go, but
she ruined the dolphins. Yeah. A twinge of Bernhard, although you hadn't read Bernhard at the time, if I'm right.
I had not, but when short stories seem to be taking the easy way out, it annoys me. So that's always the most difficult part is, what would feel true but not easy. So,
I liked the sentence, certain malicious conversational currents are so warm, so inviting, and so communal that to damn yourself up against them makes you into a spoil sport, no matter how righteous.
I think it's true. I think, maybe that's why Bernhard is so fun to read sometimes, when he's at his most misanthropic.
Yeah. So and I think in late Bernhard, and most of the ones you've read, I believe it's like The Loser and Old Masters and The Woodcutters, like the kind of late period where there's Yeah, just I've recently been visiting some of his autobiographical works, which were written when he was quite a bit younger, and that there is a certain extra bite in them. They're much less funny. It's the same form, the same tone, but just it's too real to be funny. It's yeah, and genuinely very moving as well, but just yeah, a lot of that lightness and humor and sort of brilliant pettiness is gone. Yeah, I love the like yeah that all these things about like grand themes about the helplessness of the arts or the helplessness of artists' life itself are just intercut with long rants about how bad Viennese public toilets are, you know, how bad like very specific
Very.
writers and movements are.
Yeah, when I was reading Old Masters, I think at least the first half of it is just taken up with this man enumerating all of the things he hates and which composers he thinks are bad, and the terrible taste of the Viennese public. And it's going on. Okay, we're on to Austrian hotels. Now we're on to Mahler. Now we're on to Bruckner. Now we're on to this painting, and now we're on to the kids running around in the
Yeah.
museum.
I think we get 50 pages of like Adelbert Stifter. And like, if unless you're really into Austrian lit, if you're an English speaking reader, this isn't a name that's ringing any bells. So you've really, you've really got to be in for the ride with some
Yeah.
of these rants. Yeah.
It's a real talent of the kind of cosmic hater. And in a previous episode, we were talking about Alexander Pope, who perhaps is the sort of pre-Bernhardt holder of the title of most cosmic hater. And just the talent of it, I feel myself to be generally too enthusiastic about life and the universe and people doing things to ever really, like, in the truth of my heart, I can make fun of things, but I think you have to have a real angle against reality to get into the sort of corners of this. It's almost like a sort of, I mean, I suppose kinds of critics are like this, in that most things they dislike, and occasionally there's a light that pierces through the darkness and life is worth living. um I fear this kind of life where it's where you love this thing but only for like the 2% of it that moves you. But on the other hand, I do kind of enjoy that these people exist to give it, a bit of
Yeah. Quite
contrast.
common in
Well,
opera.
yeah, I think it can it can be very satisfying to read some real haterade. Um, but it gets tiresome very quickly if it seems like someone is just spewing bile for the sake of it. And you see people try to do this on Substack, and it gets boring very fast. And I think like I'm trying to think about why it's more tolerable in Bernhard than in some of his imitators. But I think there really has to be, true hating has to have love inside it. It has to have the element of disappointment, and hope, like frustrated hope, and uh, and also some humor where you realize you're being a little bit ridiculous uh, at the same time that you're complaining about Austrian tablecloths, which I don't know. I think, uh, yeah, I think it's a lot of fun to read. It's a lot of fun to write that kind of thing, but I
Yeah.
really try to keep it to as a minimum as I can.
Yeah, I found the style completely contagious. I first read him, I was 20, 21 or something, and just could not write a sentence that did not immediately sort of repeat itself afterwards. There's something very, very contagious about the style, that's kind of infected me for life. I'm kind of ruined for life in terms of prose style now. I just can't quite escape it thoroughly. I can't write a sentence that's different entirely from the sentence before. That was the thing that kind of fascinated me about the style. And I think my first was Woodcutters, was the almost like Morton Feldman's music. It's repeating, or American minimalism in general. It's repeating over and over again with slight variations, and it creates like a beautiful Persian carpet tapestry um, in that repetition. Yeah. What just a final question to sort of like round us off, but quite a big one. What do you think is the most beautiful possible artwork which doesn't currently exist, but which you wish did exist? What would it look like?
Wow. The most beautiful artwork that does not exist, but that I wish existed. I mean, there are a bunch of cheating ways to answer this. Like, you could say, well, if Mozart had finished the Requiem, I'm sure that would be the most beautiful. But I think because I'm fundamentally, my tastes are the tastes of the 19th century in a lot of ways. Um, Sometimes I wish Schubert had lived longer, and reached a more mature style, and maybe not written an opera, but had been able to do some of what Wagner did, or break out of the forms that he was in. I think it's you know maybe it's the limitations of my imagination where I think, well, what about Tristan and Isolde, but with some of the boring parts cut out? Wouldn't that be perfect?
Whoa. You can't cut those bits out. It doesn't work.
I know. But
Tristan and Isolde, but you get the Liebestod in Act Two.
well, the Seattle Symphony next year is going to do a 60-minute ring cycle, only symphonic. And I think, wow, that must be a bit trippy.
Yeah. That was my introduction to Wagner, was bleeding chunks like that. In fact, the first piece I ever really fell in love with was like a prelude of Tristan and Isolde glued on to Liebestod, the orchestral one. I think it was Klemperer conducting. Just loved it and didn't know what it was
Guaranteed
from.
no boring bits.
Yeah.
No boring bits at all. It's just mass ecstasy beginning to end.
Yeah, but then I think, well, would you really want something to be ecstatic for that long? Like, it would eventually tire the ear and tire the mind. But I think my mind goes towards something like, the Gesamtkunstwerk, or if you could imagine somehow like Wagner without the flaws. But that would be something entirely different, and maybe not as good. I don't know. But yeah, when I think about beauty, I think about the Liebestod. And I understand why filmmakers use it so often, because it's so manipulative. If you want your audience to feel something, you can just slap that thing on whatever scene you filmed.
Have you seen The Age of Gold?
It'll do something.
The Buñuel film. It's a good bit where she's just like kissing the toe of a statue with the Liebestod.
Yeah, in Buñuel's Wuthering Heights adaptation, which he made in Mexico, whole soundtrack is just Liebestod and a bit of it's just on a loop. It keeps going. It's never boring. It's always appropriate. But that's all he needed.
Yeah, there's great footage of Salvador Dali painting a cathedral with the Liebestod synchronized with it. Yeah, and some documentary about him. Yeah. But anyway, we'll let you go, Cecily. Thank you so much for making the time. Really enjoyed it.
It was a very fun chat. Thanks for inviting me.